Hello and welcome to my world. In today's video I'm going to be covering the subject of machined aluminum gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles for the Tamiya Clod Buster and bullhead. And just a few definition of terms here. When I refer to gear case, I am referring to this center portion, sometimes called the gearbox, that holds all of the gears and the motor mounts too. Axle tubes are these tubes that are attached to the gear case that hold the axle shafts, and steering knuckles are attached to the ends of the axle tubes, and those are what steer, as shown here, and also they hold the stub axles. So that's a little bit about the terminology and what we're talking about here. And let me first start out by saying these parts are very expensive and they're not for everyone. So a lot of people through the years have asked me, since all of my trucks have machined aluminum parts like this from different manufacturers, and people have asked me, are they worthwhile? Is it cost effective? And basically the answer to that is no, they're not cost effective in my opinion, because you can replace a lot of the stock Tamiya ABS parts that you see right here. You can replace a lot of those if you break them for the cost of just some of these machined aluminum parts. So if you're after like a race truck where you're really replacing a lot of broken parts, a lot of broken axle tubes and steering knuckles, which on the Clod Buster and bullhead they're known for breaking axle tubes and steering knuckles, you could replace a whole lot of those for the machined aluminum parts that I'm going to be showing in this video. So let's just get that out of the way. No, I don't really consider these parts to be cost effective compared to what you see here, the stock Clod Buster and bullhead axle assembly. So let's just get that out of the way. But on the other hand, if you are after a sharp looking truck that attracts a lot of attention and you'll absolutely just love it to death, in my opinion anyways, and I fully admit I do have an obsession with machined aluminum parts. In my opinion, there's really no parts you can go wrong with besides what you see here, these machined aluminum gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles. So I love them. There's no doubt about it. And if you look at my trucks, as far as eye-catching parts, these are probably the most eye-catching plus machined aluminum wheels. So if that's your goal, if you're after building a really nice looking show truck, show Clod Buster, or show bullhead, you can't go wrong with any of this stuff. So let me just kind of go back a little bit too in the history of these parts. So machined aluminum gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles were, as far as I know, first introduced to the market by JPS. And that's the company that makes the ones you see right here. And they're easily identifiable because JPS put their name on the side of the gear cases. JPS made a lot of machined aluminum parts for Clod Busters back in the day. And I believe it was around the early 1990s that they came out with gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles. And next, as far as I know, on the market was GPM. That was a few years later after JPS introduced the parts. And after that was several other companies. I'm not sure exactly the order that they came out in, but Integy made them. And the way to tell Integy gear cases is that on the underside of the gear case, they had like a diamond plate pattern machined into the center of the gear case right down here. And Integy made them for a short while. They're not in production anymore. RC 4-wheel drive actually made their own. RC 4-wheel drive now is known for making full, complete trail trucks and rock crawler trucks and stuff like that. And there was one time they actually did make custom parts for Clod Busters, and they actually did make machined aluminum gear cases. And now there's Hot Racing, which I also have on Raging Bull. Those are Hot Racing gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles right there. And I didn't disassemble Raging Bull for this video, so it's all put together just sitting here on my workbench. And most recently, Hess Machine started making these parts in machined aluminum, as you can see right here. And the way you can tell the Hess Machine parts is they have their logo machined into the part right there, that H logo, and right there on the motor cover, gear cover right there. So each one of these parts, although they may kind of look the same on the outside, they are a little bit different. And I notice there's been some changes to them throughout the years. Each manufacturer seems to have their own features that they've brought to the table. And I'm mainly going to be talking about the ones I have experience with, which are Hot Racing, JPS, and Hess Machine. So unfortunately, I do not have, these are the only 3 that I have hands-on experience with. I do not have any hands-on experience with these parts made by GPM, Integy, or RC 4-wheel drive. So just to clear, I know a little bit about them, like I've seen pictures, but aside from that, I really don't know much about them. And I will state also too that the GPM gear cases really look similar to the Hot Racing ones right there. Now, the Hot Racing ones are available anodized in black, as you see here on my gear cases, and they're also available in plain aluminum, like you see on my Hot Racing axle tubes right there. But the GPM ones were available in just plain aluminum and maybe in blue. Don't quote me on that. They might have made them in blue for a short time, but I'm not really sure. But just going by pictures I've seen of the GPM gear cases, they look really similar to the Hot Racing ones, except, of course, they did not have the Hot Racing logo on them right there. So since I've been involved with these parts for quite a while, dating back to the days when JPS was the only company available, let me just say that overall, as far as getting the parts, buying the parts, there's no doubt about it that if you're into Clod Busters today, you've got it a lot easier than guys like me did back in the day, because, and I mentioned this in one of my other videos with Chernobog and also my Gravedigger truck, acquiring JPS parts back in the day was a pain. There's just no way to say it. JPS is no longer in business, so I can be 100% honest about them. Their customer service was pretty bad back in the day because JPS sold their parts factory direct, and you could buy them through their website or just give them a call and order them. But JPS was notorious for not having parts in stock and also charging customers' credit cards when they receive the orders for back-ordered parts, but not charging them when they ship them out. So it took JPS forever to manufacture parts. And I remember on the old RCMT message board, people would post about, I placed my order for JPS parts, they're not coming, I keep calling them, I can't get them, but I've got this gigantic credit card bill that I've got to pay. And that story, unfortunately, was quite common when buying JPS parts. They would charge your credit card right away, and you would have this huge credit card bill that you had to pay right away, but you didn't get your parts for months and months and months. It was just crazy, really. The way I got my JPS parts was I bought them from Stormer Hobbies. Those are the ones that are on my Gravedigger truck right now. And Stormer Hobbies, still in business today, they didn't charge, they also had them on back order. They didn't charge my credit card a dime until they shipped them out. So when they got them in stock, then they shipped them out to me, and I got them within a week or so. And it was not a big deal to me because I wasn't paying for that. For the time, they were just waiting for them to come in stock. So that was the way to get your JPS parts. And also, I bought my JPS parts from RC 4-wheel drive. Those are the parts that are on Chernobog today. And RC 4-wheel drive also was a parts distribution company, and one of the companies they distributed parts for was JPS. So same thing. RC 4-wheel drive did not charge my credit card a dime when I first placed the order for those JPS parts for Chernobog, and they only charged me when they shipped them. So as far as getting JPS parts, I never experienced any personal problems. Oh, the other JPS parts I have are also on the ESP King Clod, and those I bought secondhand from the RCMT message board. So I never had any of these massive credit card bill issues from JPS back in the day because I'd never bought any of my parts from JPS. But a lot of people did, and they really couldn't stand dealing with JPS. JPS lost a lot of customers on the RCMT message boards back in the day because of their horrible business practices. But as far as buying the Hot Racing parts and also the Hess Machine ones, which I bought those all recently within the past couple of years. No issues whatsoever. The Hess Racing or Hess Machine parts, I bought those from the Hess website directly. They were in stock, placed my order. I got my order, and about a week later, I had my parts had arrived at my door. So absolutely no issues whatsoever. Same thing with Hot Racing. Hot Racing parts, I bought those from Amazon, from a seller there. And I'm not sure about this, but I think Hot Racing parts are either imported by, or somehow they deal with Hobby Etc., which is a hobby shop in New Hampshire. Because all the sellers that sell Hot Racing parts online, either through Amazon or on eBay, they are all based in New Hampshire. And if you look at Hot Racing's website, their US mailing address is the exact same address for Hobby Etc. So somehow and I remember way back in the day, GPM's website too, it said the same thing. Their mailing address in the US was the exact same address as Hobby Etc. So somehow Hobby Etc., GPM, Hot Racing, somehow they're all related. I'm not sure exactly how, but anyway, so I think my parts came directly from Hobby Etc. And however it works out, I got my parts within a week, so no problems whatsoever. So anyway, so if you're going to be buying these parts, now that JPS is no longer in business, you don't have to deal with them, but today it's a lot easier to get these parts compared to back in the day when I first started getting into Clod Busters and bullheads. So I'll kind of just take it from the beginning here. Some of the differences with these parts, and I'll start with JPS since they're the very first ones out there. JPS, since they were the first guys, a lot of their parts are kind of rough. The machine finish on them, I don't know if this shows up on the camera, but there's a lot of tooling marks on the gear case sides right here. The edges here are pretty sharp, and they're not, I mean, you're not going to cut your finger on or anything, but you can tell that they didn't go through and clean up some of these edges. They didn't put a chamfer on them or didn't put rounds on them or anything like that. So especially like right around here, this portion here where the steering bell crank is mounted, it's kind of rough around the edges here. Whereas if you compare that to like the Hot Racing ones, you don't see that. Now my Hot Racing gear cases are black anodized, so that might be why they're so smooth, but they just don't have any of the machine tooling marks on them like the JPS ones do. The edges are nice and smooth and chamfered, so there's not a lot of sharp edges on them. So the Hot Racing ones are really kind of nice, and that was the JPS ones, and same thing with the Hess Machine ones. The Hess Machine ones are also really nicely finished. On the side, you can't see some of the machine tooling marks, but they're definitely a lot smoother than the JPS ones. So Hess Machine does a nice job finishing those up. One thing about JPS parts too, this is just overall for all their parts, is that they made a lot of design changes in their parts without telling anyone. And some of the changes they made are quite drastic, to the point where if you have a certain suspension or steering setup on your Clod Buster, you might not be able to use JPS parts. So since JPS is no longer in business, I want to kind of let people know, because the only way you can get JPS parts now is secondhand, and by now they might have passed through many owners. So even the current owners of these parts that are selling them now may not know about these little differences in detail. So I want to point those out in these videos, so that way people that are buying them know what they're getting, and they can tell, you'll be able to tell before you spend some hard-earned money on these parts, be able to tell whether they will work with your truck or not. And one of the differences with JPS parts that they made was that some of them have this mounting structure here for the steering bell crank. The stock style Clod Buster steering system has that bell crank on it, but I've seen pictures of some JPS gear cases that do not have that. This whole boxy assembly here is just completely machined off, so it's completely gone. So if you are planning to use the stock style steering system on your Clod Buster, or if you have an upper suspension link mounting kit that needs this bell crank mounting thing here, if you buy a JPS gear case that has that part completely removed, you won't be able to use that steering system or that upper suspension link mounting bracket. So just something to be aware of. JPS also, I remember reading in RC Car Action magazine, they even mentioned this, that some of the early JPS gear cases, the machining tolerances were too tight, and thus the gear mesh inside the gear case, the gear mesh was too tight. And so the gears had too much friction. They didn't roll smoothly, didn't engage smoothly. So I don't know how you would go about fixing that. But anyways, when you're spending this much for these JPS parts, especially today, they're kind of considered collectible. You want to make sure that your gears are going to be able to mesh together smoothly inside of there. And unfortunately, the tolerances are so small and so minute that you won't be able to tell that until after you put your gears in there and close up the gear cases and try to rotate the gears. So something to be aware of. On the axle tubes with JPS, I mentioned this in my video about Chernobog 2. Some of their axle tubes have the ball joint machined into them, like there's one there and one there, for the stock style suspension system with the ladder bars. But some of the axle tubes do not have those big ball joints machined into them. The axle tubes that are on Chernobog do not. So if you're planning on using the stock ladder bar style suspension system and you want to use JPS axle tubes, make sure you get the ones that have the ball joints on them. Something to keep an eye on. Also, as far as right here, if you notice, these axle tubes here on the steering kingpins have some brass bushings right here on the top and the bottom kingpins right down there. There's one too. Later axle tubes from JPS had ball bearings there, which incidentally, that's also what the hot racing ones, as you can see in there, hot racing ones also have ball bearings in there. So these JPS axle tubes I'm showing here, these are the older style that have the bronze bushings there. All of the other JPS axle tubes I have on my trucks, they all are the newer style ones that have the ball bearings there. So that's another difference. And one other difference in the steering knuckles. Oh, before I forget too, while I'm mentioning steering knuckles, JPS was the only company that sold the steering knuckles and the axle tubes together as a set. All of the other manufacturers like Hot Racing, Hess Machine, they all sell the steering knuckles as a separate part from the axle tubes. Okay, so if you're buying JPS axle tubes, make sure they come with the steering knuckles, because JPS steering knuckles are proprietary. They will only work with JPS axle tubes. And good luck finding JPS axle steering knuckles sold separately nowadays. If you happen to just buy JPS axle tubes that don't come with the knuckles, good luck trying to find these steering knuckles separately, okay? So just to let you know, these are steering knuckles, JPS ones are proprietary. They will only fit on JPS axle tubes. One of the changes JPS did make with their axle tubes is that where the knuckle attaches, or excuse me, the steering arm attaches to the knuckle right here, these ones, I'm not sure if these are newer ones or older ones, but these ones are, the arms are mounted on the center line of the axle shaft. So if you look at it straight on from the side there, the steering arm right here is mounted in the center of the axle shaft. Okay. And all of my other JPS axle tubes have the steering arm mounted offset above the axle shaft. So that way, all the ones I have more replicate the stock Tamiya steering knuckle, where the steering arm is mounted above the stub axle, the center of the stub axle. So the JPS steering arms also went through a design change. The ones you see here are the ones that originally, when the JPS steering knuckles and axle tubes were made, this is what they originally looked like, where they had the same consistent thickness throughout their entire length here. But somewhere along the way, JPS made some that have a thinner section right here. So they kind of step down right here where the steering links are mounted. So they're a little thinner on this end right here. I don't know why they did that, made that change, but if you look at videos I made of the ESP King Clod, the steering arms on those steering knuckles on that truck, they're a little bit thinner right here. So not a huge change, but just something that's worth mentioning. just some of the changes that JPS made to their parts. And keep in mind, JPS never told anyone about these changes that they made to their parts. So through the years of production, they just would make these changes. The parts themselves do not have any indication, no revision markings on them. Nothing is stamped on them. They're not date coded, as far as I can tell. Never seen any date codes or anything on these things. And the packaging never had any like revision numbers or anything like that on them. So with JPS parts, what you got is what you got. So, and even though some of these changes they made were pretty critical, like if you could mount your suspension arms on there, or excuse me, suspension links on there, or ladder bars on there, or even if your gears would mesh and rotate smoothly, you had no idea of knowing what you were getting from JPS until you actually got them. So just something to keep in mind. And I remember reading stories about people who have gotten burned back in the day, not recently, but back in the day, people did get burned by these little design changes that JPS made and didn't tell anyone. So just something to keep in mind. Thankfully, I've been okay. I've never had any problems with making my JPS parts and getting them to fit, but it is just something to be concerned about. One also thing too to know about the JPS axle tubes is that the shape of them does not match the shape of the stock Tamiya axle tubes. So the stock steel Tamiya axle stay, which you see right here, that will not be able to mount onto the JPS axle tubes, because this portion of the tube right here where the steering knuckle is, the geometry there is quite different compared to that same portion of the axle tube of the stock Tamiya parts. So just something to keep in mind. So these axle tubes, there's really no way without doing some serious modification to the JPS parts, there's no way to put the axle stays on there. So I tried fitting them on mine, and I had to do, in the previous owner, I'm not the original owner of these JPS parts you see here, I somehow got these through the years. The previous owner drilled holes, if you notice right here in the ends of his axle tubes, probably to mount suspension links, and also there's another hole drilled on top of the axle tube right there, probably to mount suspension links. And I also mentioned in my video on my Gravedigger truck how I had to kind of do the same thing. I didn't have good results with that. It resulted in really bad suspension link geometry. So thankfully JPS came out with a suspension link and shock absorber mounting kit that you'll see on my Gravedigger truck and also on Chernobog that clamps onto the axle tubes right here. That solved all the suspension linkage geometry problems. But if you want to mount your suspension links onto JPS axle tubes and you don't have access to that suspension link mounting kit, you're gonna have to do something like this that you see right here. Drill these holes, and good luck with that. I never had any luck doing that myself. So now let's move on to look at some of the hot racing parts here. So the hot racing parts, one of the things I really like about their gear case is that the gear case halves right here have like a tongue and groove. If you're familiar with wooden flooring like I am, they have kind of like a tongue and groove construction here. So that way there's no overlap between the two gear cases right here. And it looks really nice. It's really smooth, as opposed to, say, the JPS and also the Hess Machine ones are this way too. Instead of having a tongue and groove joint right there, they have more like, if I may borrow steam locomotive boiler terminology, they have what's called a lap seam here. And that results in this ridge right here that goes around the entire circumference of the gear case and kind of sticks up. This has no effect on whether the gear case seals dirt better or anything like that, but it just looks nicer, really nice on the hot racing one, how it doesn't have that lap seam sticking up, bulging up right there. The hot racing parts, as far as I know, they have not had any revisions to them. Please, somebody, if they have, if somebody knows, please correct me by leaving a comment below. I have not heard or read about any changes to the hot racing parts through the years. It is nice how recently they have started making the gear cases in plain silver aluminum again. So those were out of production, seems like for a long time, at least a couple of years. That's the only reason why I have the black anodized ones here on Raging Bull. I would have much preferred to use the plain aluminum ones to match the axle tubes. But it's nice to see that Hot Racing does give you a choice if you want black anodized or plain aluminum. To the Hess Machine also offers their gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles in anodized in black too now. So that's really nice. But the overall machining finish on the Hot Racing ones is really nice. It's nice and smooth, not a lot of tooling marks on them. As you can see here, the stock steel axle trusses bolt onto Hot Racing gear cases and axle tubes with no problems whatsoever. So the Hot Racing parts can accommodate stock bumpers, stock axle tubes, and also stock style steering with the bell crank can mount onto the Hot Racing gear cases with no problem. One thing that's a little bit different about the Hot Racing axle tubes is if you look down here, you can see that the axle tubes, where they're mounted to the gear case, you can see the ends of these, see how the screws are, the ends of the screws there with the screw thread are poking out here on Raging Bull. That's because the 3mm tapped holes are in the flanges of the axle tubes on the Hot Racing setup. The gear cases have 3mm through holes, and the axle tube flanges are tapped with 3mm thread. So the heads of the screws are inside the gear case, and the only way to replace a damaged axle tube with the Hot Racing setup is you have to disassemble the gear case completely. So that's really a lot of work. It's really a pain. But if you look at the JPS and also the Hess Machine ones, they have 3mm screw heads right there. And that is because, and same thing with the JPS ones. See the screw heads right there? And that is because on the JPS and the Hess Machine ones, that bolted joint right there is the opposite of what's on the Hot Racing ones. On the JPS and the Hess Machine, the through hole is in the axle tube flange, and the tapped hole is on the gear case. So that way, if you ever damage a JPS or a Hess Machine axle tube, if you damage one of those, you can easily just undo the 4 screws from the outside, don't have to disassemble the entire gear case, and you can just take off those 4 screws from the outside and pull out the whole axle tube as one assembly. So not a problem. Whereas the Hot Racing ones, yeah, you've got a lot of work if you want to replace a damaged axle tube on the Hot Racing setup. But so far, I'm very happy with the Hot Racing parts. They fit together perfectly. I did not have any issues with putting the gears in, no problems with the gear mesh or anything like that. Everything fit together perfectly. One thing about the Hot Racing and also the Hess Machine parts is that their screws from the factory are black oxide coated steel screws. And if you notice, I replaced all of mine with stainless steel. And same thing with the Hess Machine ones. Hess Machine, all the screws are black oxide steel. That also not only in the gear case, also the axle tubes, everything on the Hess Machine and the Hot Racing ones. All the hardware is steel black oxide coated. So not a big fan of those. I replaced all of mine with stainless steel, as you can see here. Also replaced all of my steering kingpins with stainless steel shoulder screws, both Hess Machine and also on my Hot Racing ones inside there. Those are stainless steel shoulder screws that I put in there, so to replace the black oxide coated ones. So Hot Racing and Hess Machine kind of cutting corners a little bit with their hardware quality. So black oxide screws are cheaper than stainless steel, generally speaking. I know so when I buy them anyway. So I replaced all of mine with stainless steel. So that's something you have to factor into if you want to replace those. But basically the Hot Racing parts, I was pleasantly surprised with them because they are made overseas. I thought maybe the quality would be less, but I'm very impressed with them. I really like them. They fit together perfectly, nice, smooth. The fit and finish is really good. The one complaint I may have with them is the gear cases right here. And I mentioned this in my video about Raging Bull. Hopefully I can get a shot of it. I don't know if you can see it in there. But where the steel axle truss mounts. On this side right there, there's a silver spacer right there. And I would prefer, that looks like a total afterthought by Hot Racing, instead of just extending the gear case so that way it met directly with the mounting flange of the steel axle stay right there. Instead, it's a little bit short, so to make up that space, they stuck in this aluminum spacer there, 3mm spacer there. So I prefer they didn't do that, but anyway, it's probably just cutting corners a little bit, but I prefer they didn't do that. But so that brings me to the final ones that I have, which are the Hess Machine ones. These are the newest of these parts to the market, to the Clod Buster market, and the Hess Machine ones are really nice. They're machined really smoothly. I was very impressed by them. There's the edges, as I mentioned, how sharp the edges are on the JPS gear cases. The Hess Machine ones, they've chamfered all the edges here. I don't know if it can show up in the video, but all the edges on the gear cases are nice and chamfered, so they're nice and smooth. No sharp edges or anything like that. But they also did the same thing on the axle tubes and the steering knuckles. They've chamfered all the edges along here. But one thing I notice is that in the corners, like, I don't know if this will show up on camera, but like in the corners along here, they've chamfered the edge here, chamfered the edge there, but they didn't continue the chamfer inside these corners right there. So there's a little bit rough in there. It's like they couldn't find a chamfer bit that was small enough to go in there. But that's the way it is there. Also along here, same thing. Right there in the steering knuckle, right there, the chamfer kind of continues on that top part there, continues down there, but it doesn't continue in the tight radius of the corner. Same thing right here. Chamfer there, but no chamfer in the corner right there. So I noticed that throughout on the Hess Machine parts. So it would have been nice if they continued that chamfer all the way through, even in the tight radius corners like that. The Hess, something about also this kind of, the hardware on Hess Machine and also the Hot Racing parts, they all use metric hardware, whereas JPS uses imperial. So a lot of these screws like you see here are 440 screws. So if you use JPS parts, just keep that in mind. Don't mix up your tools. Make sure you use imperial tools on JPS parts and metric tools on Hot Racing parts and on Hess Machine parts. One thing that's really nice about the Hess Machine axle tubes is that, remember I mentioned on the JPS parts how where the steering arm was mounted on the steering knuckle? With Hess Machine, they give you a choice. So if you look here, I have my steering arm mounted in the highest position, so it's above the center line of the stub axle, and that's the same way the stock Tamiya parts are. So they're the stock steering knuckles on the Clod Buster are mounted like this above the center line of the axle, but with Hess Machine, it's the only ones that give you a choice. You can mount it there, you can also mount it in the center, so it's lined up in the center of the stub axle, or you can mount it down low, so it's below the center line of the stub axle. So it's really nice options there when you use the Hess Machine parts. One of the big improvements to the Hess Racing steering knuckles is that the ball bearing used in the end right here is much larger. Its outer diameter is much larger than the outer diameter of the bearings used in the JPS steering knuckles right there, and also the bearings used in the Hot Racing steering knuckles. The JPS and the Hot Racing ones use the exact same size bearing as the stock Tamiya Clod Buster steering knuckles, but the Hot Racing one is larger in diameter, so should theoretically be a bit more durable if you like to jump your Clod Buster a lot. Hess Racing also is the only one of these manufacturers that gives you a choice, the size of that bearing, the inner diameter of that bearing, depending on which axles you are using. I am using the stock Tamiya stub axles here and axle shafts, but Hess Racing is the only one that also gives you the option of larger inner diameter bearings right there to accommodate for the MIP CVD axle shafts that are sold by RC 4-wheel drive and ThunderTech Racing. So those MIP made axle shafts are much larger in diameter than the stock Tamiya axle shaft, so you need a ball bearing with a larger inner diameter. And Hess Machine is the only one of these manufacturers that gives you a choice in what size bearing you're going to use depending on which axle shaft you're going to be using. So that's a really nice option that only Hess Machine offers. One thing too about the Hess Racing steering knuckles is that they do not, and axle tubes too, they do not rotate on ball bearings or bushings right here at the kingpins. So unlike the JPS ones and the Hot Racing, which axle tubes which have ball bearings here, or older JPS axle tubes have bushings here, the Hess Racing or Hess Machine ones do not have any bearings or bushings at all for the kingpins. So I do not know if that has an effect on the steering smoothness, but one of the nice things about having ball bearings there is that on the Hot Racing ones and the JPS ones is you can replace those ball bearings when they wear out. Whereas the Hess Machine ones, you cannot replace anything there. It's strictly stainless steel in my case, since my kingpins are stainless steel rotating on machined aluminum right there. So I don't know what you do to accommodate for wear there. One other thing that's really nice too about the Hess Machine gear cases is that they come with this triangular piece of really nice machined aluminum, and that mounts onto the 3 holes right here. 1, 2, 3. Those mount onto the 3 holes here on the gear case. 1, 2, 3. And so that this part goes on there like that. And what it is a suspension link mount. So if you have a 4-link suspension that requires the links to be mounted to the top center of the gear case, the Hess Machine gear case comes with this really nice bracket to mount those on. And also, Hess Machine gives you the option if you want to use the stock style steering with a bell crank like this. It's on the Hot Racing one, and also what's on the JPS. Hess Machine is the only company that gives you that option too. They actually sell a separate bracket that you remove this suspension link mount bracket and you replace it with the bell crank mount bracket, which mounts using those exact same 3 holes right there. So the Hess Machine gear case is the only one that gives you the option of having a stock style steering system with the bell crank or an upper suspension link mount. So that's a really nice feature in the Hess Machine gear case. And the steering bell crank mount from Hess Machine is a separate part, so you do have to buy that separately. I believe it's $25, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at their website in a while. But that's a nice option that is only available on the Hess Machine. They give you an option for that. As opposed to like JPS, where they force you, either you have to buy a gear case like this with the bell crank mount there, or you have to buy the ones I've seen pictures of that I mentioned earlier with the whole mount here just gone, machined off, and then you can never use the stock style steering system. But Hess Machine gives you that option, so that's a really nice thing. One thing about the Hess Machine too is that their gearbox, before I forget, all 3 of these gear cases, the Hess Machine, Hot Racing, and JPS, they all have adjustable motor mounts. So that's really nice. That gives you a chance to change your gear ratios, which, if you look on the stock Clod Buster gear case, you cannot. Your stock motor mounts to these 2 screw holes right here, and there's no slots there. Whereas if you notice the Hess Machine one, there is a motor mounting hole right there, and the other hole is an arc. It's an arc, a slot, an arc shape, so you can arc the motor. The motor moves in an arc there. Also on the JPS one, and this is what the Hot Racing one looks like too. Hot Racing motor is mounted with 2 slots right there. So I'm not sure if there's an advantage of the straight slots of the JPS or the arc-shaped slot of the Hess Machine one. If anybody knows, please feel free to leave a comment below. I'm not really sure, because as you can see right now, I have not mounted my Hess Machine gear cases. I haven't mounted the motors yet, so haven't used them. These are going on my project Clod Buster that I'm building right now, so I'm still in the process of building that truck. But that's a nice feature. You do not, if you buy any of these aluminum gear cases from any of these manufacturers, you do not have to buy a separate adjustable motor mount like you do with the stock Clod Buster gear case. So that's nice. And with the with the Hess Machine ones too. Also, unlike the JPS parts, the Hess Machine gear cases and axle tubes, you can mount all of the stock Tamiya ladder bars right here because the Hess Machine axle tubes have the ball joints machined into them. There's no other way to get those. And you can also mount the axle stays. The axle stays will mount just like on the stock Clod Buster axle tubes between here and also between there. And I'm not going to use those, and because for this truck, so that's why I don't have them installed here, but I'm not going to use them on this truck that I'm building right now because the quad shock mount kit that I have from Crawford Performance Engineering does not allow enough clearance for the axle stays to go on here, unfortunately. I always advocate using those axle stays whenever possible, but unfortunately on this truck I cannot do it. So in this, for the sake of, I'm giving up some axle strength for more shock absorbers. So with show trucks, always got to have more shock absorbers, the better. So anyways, so I would not advocate that, and I do not, especially if you're going to jump your truck. Always use those stock axle stays or aftermarket axle stays. But with the JPS parts, that's not even an option, but at least with the Hess Machine ones, that is an option. So some of the other things that I do like about the Hess Machine gear cases and axle tubes is that they, unlike the JPS ones where, as I said before, you have no idea what revision you're getting with the Hess Machine gear cases, and here I have a copy of the instruction manual right here, they actually state right here at the top, version 3. So although the gear case itself is not, as far as I can tell, not marked anywhere with any type of revision numbers or anything like that, or not date coded, but at least the instruction manual tells you right there, this is the 3rd version of the gearbox, so you know exactly what you're getting if you get the instruction manual. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you buy Hess Machine parts secondhand, ask them which version you get, and I do not know what the difference is between the versions, but you try contacting Hess Machine, maybe they'll let you know. But it's just nice to know that it is documented somewhere that Hess Machine has made changes and that you will be able to know exactly what you're getting as long as you get that instruction manual with your gear cases. Unlike JPS, which is a total gamble. Who knows what you're getting, as I found out firsthand. So overall, I was very impressed with the Hess Machine gear cases and axle tubes and steering knuckles, but the machine quality is really good. As a good example of that, the changes through the years. If you look on the JPS gear cases, notice what they use for a gear cover, just a disc of machined aluminum right there. Whereas if you look at the Hess Machine one, it's really nice. It's actually got different surfaces machined into it, different thicknesses and stuff like that. It's got this cutout here for the anti-rotation bracket, whereas the JPS one does not have. That reminds me, that's another change. Some of the JPS gear covers have a tapped hole, 3 millimeter hole in them for that the gear case anti-rotation bracket, but some of them do not, as you can see here. This one does not have that on it. The JPS gear case that I have on the King Clod does have that hole in it, so I was able to use the stock style anti-rotation bracket with it, but this one does not. So yeah, you have to use some other method to stop your gear cases from rotating, but Hess Machine, they do give you that option. So one more change that JPS doesn't tell you about. So overall, very impressed with the machining quality of the JPS parts, but I did notice a few flaws in them on right here. I don't know if this will show up on camera, but at the end of the axle tube, right here where the steering yoke is, there's some machining mark right here and right here where like too much material was removed. And if I flip this around, if you look on the other side here, hopefully this will show up. This portion here of the yoke also has that same too much material removed there, but down here it does not. So down here is perfect. It's nice and smooth and flat, whereas here there's a little bit of material removed. Same thing, and that's also true on the other side here. So if you look at this, and I bought 4 of these axle tubes, and all 4 of them are the same like this. So for example, on this other side here, there's machine right there. Took out too much material there. Took out a little bit too much material down there. But if I flip that one around here, you notice too much material removed here, no material removed there. So all 4 of my axle tubes from Hess Machine are like that. So not a huge deal, doesn't really affect the performance or anything, but it's something I prefer not to see. And I don't see that on my hot racing axle tubes, for example. Also, and this one's a little bit more glaring, is this. Notice this steering knuckle here turns nice and easy, the way it should, the way all the other ones do. They all move just no problem, just like on the hot racing ones too. Same thing, those knuckles rotate with freely. No binding whatsoever, but if you notice this one here, it doesn't. And that's because the screw head here is rubbing more so on this surface of the steering axle tube yoke right here. So it's rubbing on that surface, and I don't notice that. It's not here on this one or the other Hess Machine axle tubes that I have and steering knuckles I have. They don't have that problem. They all move freely like this one. This is the only one here where it's just a little bit, doesn't move freely. It's not bad. I don't think it will affect the steering any, my steering servo any. My steering servo is plenty strong enough to overcome that, but it's just something that I wish was not there. And I think that's because this surface here was not machined far down enough. It's a little bit, just like 1/1000th at the most, 1/1000th of an inch too thick right there. So it would be nice if that weren't that way, but I don't think it will affect anything. I'll know when I get my steering system connected and hooked up. To give you an idea of this, okay, if you notice how this one moves freely like that, just gravity alone, whereas this one here, notice it doesn't flop around the way it should. So just something I'll keep an eye on. I wish it weren't that way, but that's the only really machining true flaw or mistakes that I've noticed in the Hess Machine parts. I mentioned plenty of the mistakes with JPS parts through the years, but those are more so production changes, not necessarily mistakes in the parts that I got as far as how they were manufactured on any of the JPS parts that I have. And I've never come across any of those types of mistakes on any of the hot racing parts that I have. So just something to keep in mind. But so overall, those are just some of the differences between all these different machined aluminum parts. And through the years, a lot of these companies have come and gone, so I don't know how much longer these companies are going to keep making these. JPS has already bit the dust. Hess Machine, their parts, I thought they were being discontinued because they weren't in stock for a long time, but now they're available on their website. I don't know of any other place to buy Hess Machine parts aside from their official website. So they do have them in stock right now as I film this. The hot racing parts are available through Hobby Etc. and also online at Amazon and also on eBay from, as I said, I believe from sellers that I believe are all basically Hobby Etc. So don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. If anybody knows too the relationship between hot racing, GPM, and Hobby Etc., please leave a comment below. I'd love to know. I suspect they're related based on their mailing addresses, but I'm not really sure. I've never seen that confirmed anywhere. So, but anyways, those are the differences and similarities between these machined aluminum gear cases, axle tubes, and steering knuckles for the Tamiya Clod Buster and Bullhead. And I love these parts. I have a personal obsession with machined aluminum parts on my trucks, as you can see if you look at any of the videos I have of my trucks. But I just wanted to get this out there to show people what the differences are between and similarities are and things to look for before you decide to buy these parts. They're not cheap. There's no way around it. These are expensive parts, and you really want to know what you're getting before you pay for these things. So I totally get that. I understand that. So if anybody has any further questions or comments, please leave them below. I have experience with all three of these manufacturers, Hot Racing, JPS, and now, as of lately, now I have hands-on experience with Hess Machine parts too. So if anybody has any questions or comments or wants to know anything more that I didn't cover in this video, please let me know. Leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them. I read all the comments. So thank you for tuning into this video. It's a long one, but it's a big subject that I haven't seen covered anywhere else. So I wanted to make sure I get this out there so everybody knows what it is they're buying. So please, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. This is one of the longer videos I've done. So hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next video.